Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. Tuppence Beresford had long maintained that curiosity was a respectable vice, provided one dressed neatly while indulging it. That morning, she was doing precisely that, perched at the breakfast table in their cheerful Chelsea flat, the Times propped beside the teapot, her blonde bob perfectly set, her interest caught not by international politics, but by a small item about the King's upcoming absence from England. "Off to Balmoral," she murmured, buttering her toast. "Imagine having an entire estate just for avoiding one's relatives." From behind the paper opposite her, Tommy made a noise halfway between a chuckle and a sigh. "I should think avoiding you would require more than an estate, old thing. Perhaps a fortified island." She gave him a glance of mock offence. "If that's your idea of romantic breakfast conversation, I'm reconsidering my vow to let you have the last crumpet." Before Tommy could retort, the post landed with a soft thump at the door. Tuppence, who never left mysteries to the servants they didn't have, fetched it herself. Among the envelopes, one electricity bill, one advertisement for corsets, lay a cream card sealed with red wax and stamped with the royal cipher. Her eyebrows lifted. "Now this," she said, holding it to the light, "is either a joke or treason." Tommy lowered his paper, curiosity replacing complacency. "Open it." The card was thick, expensive, and faintly scented of sandalwood. The engraved lettering read, "The honour of your presence is requested at Sanborn Park for a private weekend, Friday to Sunday. Attendance discreetly required." Below that, in neat type, "Lord Alistair Henshaw, on behalf of His Majesty." There was no RSVP. "Well," Tuppence said, her eyes dancing, "at last, our invitation to the palace." "Don't be absurd," said Tommy, though not convincingly. "Why on earth would the King, or anyone in his employ, want us?" "Perhaps to liven the conversation. We could teach them how to spot spies in the cucumber sandwiches." Tommy folded the paper, frowning. "I don't like it. We've been out of the game for years. Why now?" His question was answered, oddly enough, by the telephone. The voice on the line was familiar. Colonel Carter, their old intelligence liaison from the war. "Ah, Beresford. Good. I was told you might hear from us. Yes, the invitation's genuine. No, I can't tell you why. Consider it a service to the Crown." "Is there danger?" Tommy asked. "Only of the social variety. Dress properly, keep your ears open, and above all, discretion. You'll be there as guests. Nothing more." The line clicked dead. Tuppence replaced the receiver slowly. "Well," she said at last, "I always did fancy a royal weekend." The motorcar hummed along the Sussex road beneath a pale sky that promised rain but couldn't be bothered to deliver it. The journey, though picturesque, had the taut expectancy of a play's opening act. "Sanborn Park," Tuppence mused as they turned past wrought-iron gates bearing the royal crest. "I imagine the curtains alone could pay the rent on our flat." Tommy smiled, but his hands were tight on the wheel. "Let's hope the hospitality matches the price." The drive curved through manicured lawns toward a house so vast it looked built to impress God himself. A butler of funereal solemnity awaited them on the steps, flanked by two footmen who seemed to have been carved from the same pale oak. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," the butler intoned, "welcome to Sanborn Park." Inside, the house was a study in restrained opulence, Persian carpets, ancestral portraits, the faint scent of beeswax and history. Tuppence noted that the staff moved with an odd precision, like players following choreography they didn't quite understand. Their host, Lord Alistair Henshaw, emerged from the drawing-room, a tall man with thinning hair, a courteous smile, and eyes that seemed always to measure before they greeted. "Delighted," he said, shaking Tommy's hand a fraction too long. "Such a pleasure to have old friends of the service among us. His Majesty regrets he cannot attend this weekend himself, but you'll find the company agreeable." Tuppence glanced around at the company, a handful of guests scattered like pieces on a half-finished chessboard. A retired general with a chest of medals that appeared to outweigh his conscience, a nervous-looking historian polishing his spectacles, a glamorous woman whose age was as artfully concealed as her intentions, and a young man with the posture of someone hiding either guilt or poetry. All smiled with varying degrees of sincerity as Henshaw made introductions. The actress was Miss Lillian Vale, the historian Dr. Pembroke, and the poet, though no one confirmed it, was her secretary. Curious mixture, Tuppence murmured under her breath. Like a fruitcake, Tommy replied, rich, sweet, and probably containing something dangerous. Dinner was a display of formal civility, fine silver, candlelight, and conversation so polite it might have been composed by committee. Henshaw steered topics carefully away from politics, gossip, or the war. Whenever anyone strayed near sensitive ground, his tone cooled like water over coals. Tuppence, watching him, thought he wore the manner of a man afraid of cracks in his own facade. After the meal, she and Tommy excused themselves under pretext of fatigue, though neither felt remotely tired. As they ascended the grand staircase, she whispered, "Every smile in that room looked borrowed." He nodded. "And our host, too smooth by half. Carter didn't send us here for the champagne." Their assigned room overlooked the gardens. The night was unusually still, broken only by the distant sound of a gate creaking on its hinges. Tommy checked the windows. Tuppence examined the bedside drawer, where she found a notepaper embossed with the Sanborn crest, and a motto beneath it, "Discretion above all." "Charming," she said dryly. "Do you suppose it's embroidered on the servants' pillows too?" Tommy sat on the edge of the bed, lighting a cigarette. "If this is a royal estate, where's the king? Perhaps he's the invisible guest of honor." "Or the reason we're here," he said softly. For a while they sat in companionable silence, listening to the distant hum of the house, the muted footsteps, a door closing somewhere below, the faint murmur of voices that stopped the moment one listened too hard. Then Tuppence rose, restless. "It's all rather theatrical, isn't it? A mysterious summons, a house full of suspects, and a host who smiles like he's rehearsing it." Tommy grinned faintly. "You sound almost disappointed there's no body in the library yet." "Give it time, dear," she said. "The weekend's only begun." The next morning dawned with deceptive cheer. A footman brought breakfast to their door, perfectly poached eggs, scones still warm, and a folded note beside the tray. Tuppence opened it. The handwriting was elegant, the message brief. "Your presence will ensure discretion." There was no signature. She looked at Tommy. "That line again," he frowned. "From the invitation?" "Yes, and now delivered to our room. Someone wants us to remember it." "Or to wonder who's reminding us." She placed the note back on the tray and smiled with deliberate calm. "Well, my dear, we've been invited to play a game. I suggest we play it better than they expect." Tommy lifted his teacup in silent agreement. Outside, the estate shimmered in polite sunlight. Guests strolled the terrace, laughed too brightly, and avoided one another's eyes. Somewhere below the surface of Sanborn Park's elegance, something was already beginning to stir, a secret that would not remain discreet for long. As Tuppence adjusted her hat before the mirror, she caught her own reflection and smiled faintly. "I do love a weekend in the country," she said. "One never knows who will die before Sunday." Tommy groaned. "Let's hope it isn't us." "Don't be dreary," she said lightly, linking her arm through his. "We've survived worse things than royal hospitality." Together they stepped into the corridor, unaware that before the weekend's end that harmless phrase, "Your presence will ensure discretion," would come to sound very much like a warning. Breakfast at Sanborn Park had all the gaiety of a diplomatic funeral. Silver gleamed, conversation murmured politely around the long mahogany table, and every smile was the exact width of good breeding. The scent of fresh coffee floated above it all like an attempted peace offering. Tuppence, in pale blue and pearls, stirred her tea thoughtfully and watched. The table's occupants formed a curious constellation. The retired General Markham, bluff and red-faced, his voice a parade-ground bark disguised as civility. Dr. Pembroke, the historian, whose spectacles caught the morning light but whose hands fidgeted with his napkin, as though uncertain of his right to exist. Miss Lillian Vale, once the darling of London's stage, her beauty fading but her command of an audience intact, and a young man named Quentin Vale, introduced as her secretary, though Tuppence doubted secretarial skills were his chief talent. At the head of the table, Lord Alistair Henshaw presided, his manner gracious, his smile thin as the toast. Beside him sat Mr. Arthur Haddon, the royal secretary, an eager fellow with too slick hair and a laugh that arrived half a second too early. "So charming of you all to accept my humble invitation," Henshaw said, buttering his roll with surgical precision. "I hope Sanborn provides a suitable change from town." The general harumphed. "Always prefer the country. None of your blasted traffic or reporters." Miss Vale offered a smile that could have melted stage lights. "Or gossip, one hopes." There was a flicker, too brief for most eyes but not for tuppence, between Henshaw and Haddon. The sort of look exchanged when someone mentions a secret that must remain buried. Tommy, across from her, caught her gaze and raised one eyebrow. She knew that look. "You've seen something, haven't you?" She replied with a slight lift of her teacup. "Later." The conversation meandered to unthreatening topics. Gardens, the difficulty of obtaining good staff, the price of petrol. But beneath the calm surface ran a current of evasion. Everyone avoided the same question. Why were they here? After breakfast, Henshaw invited the guests to enjoy the morning as they pleased. He himself disappeared behind a carved oak door, followed closely by Haddon, whose nervous glance back reminded tuppence of a schoolboy heading for the headmaster's office. Tommy strolled out to the terrace to smoke, while tuppence, feigning an interest in art, wandered into the drawing-room. The room was grand, but curiously airless. Heavy curtains, portraits of unsmiling ancestors, and a grand piano whose lid gleamed like a mirror to secrets. She drifted past it toward the adjoining alcove, where voices, low, sharp, halted her step. "Mustn't leave this house," said one, taut with urgency. Haddon's voice. Another replied, cool and clipped. "Henshaw. Then make certain of it. We cannot risk another breach." "There's talk already. If the king—" "Enough!" The command sliced the air. A moment later came the soft scrape of a drawer and the rustle of papers. Tuppence moved instinctively behind a high-backed chair, heart drumming. Through the narrow gap, she glimpsed Haddon clutching a small file tied with red ribbon. Henshaw spoke again, quieter now. "You understand, Arthur. Silence serves us all." A pause. Then, "If you fail me, remember, failure can be fatal." The words hung in the stillness like gunpowder smoke. Footsteps approached. Tuppence turned toward the fireplace, pretending to study a portrait. Henshaw's reflection appeared in the glass beside her, impeccably calm, except for the faint tremor of his left hand. "Ah, Mrs. Beresford," he said smoothly. "I trust you're finding Sanborn agreeable." "Quite," she replied, "though the portraits are rather intimidating. They look as if they'd object to anyone enjoying themselves." He smiled, thin and precise. "Tradition can be stern company. Enjoy your morning." When he left, she waited a count of 10 before exhaling. Haddon followed, clutching the file as though it might bite. She found Tommy in the rose garden, pipe in hand, surveying the distant lawns. "Enjoying the scenery?" she asked. He nodded. "Peaceful as a picture postcard, which naturally makes me uneasy." "Quite right too," she said. "I've just overheard our host and his secretary plotting something that mustn't leave this house." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Spying again before luncheon. You'll have our cover blown." "Don't be dull." It was the most thrilling whisper I've heard in weeks, and I rather think it concerned something in writing. Haddon had a file tied with red ribbon. "Official documents." "Unless he's secretly rehearsing for a play." Tommy tamped his pipe thoughtfully. "So, Haddon's frightened, Henshaw's angry, and everyone else is pretending nothing's wrong. Classic setup." Tuppence's eyes sparkled. "Precisely. The only question is, what's inside that file and why is it worth whispering about?" The day passed in a genteel sort of limbo. Guests took tea on the terrace, played croquet with forced laughter, and behaved like actors waiting for the next cue. Tuppence noticed that Haddon avoided eye contact, and that Henshaw, though gracious, watched everyone with the faint detachment of a man guarding an invisible fence. Miss Vale held court near the fountain, regaling Dr. Pembroke with anecdotes of her theatrical triumphs. "The audience wept," she said, hand over heart. "Even the critics wept. Of course they called it melodrama, but what is life without a touch of drama?" "Indeed," murmured Pembroke, his eyes darting not at her but toward the Manor's upper windows, where the curtains in Henshaw's study trembled slightly, as if disturbed by someone unseen. By dusk, the atmosphere had curdled into something brittle. Dinner was a quieter affair than breakfast. Even the silver seemed to chime with restraint. Afterward, Tuppence and Tommy withdrew to the library, a vast room lined with shelves and the faint smell of leather and dust. The lamps burned low. Tommy was examining a shelf of military histories when Tuppence said softly, "Do you ever get the feeling we've walked into the middle of a play where no one remembers their lines?" "Frequently," he replied, "though the trick, my dear, is pretending one knows the ending." As if to punctuate the thought, a sound echoed from the corridor, a hurried footstep, the rattle of a key, a muffled thud. Then silence. They exchanged a glance and moved together toward the door. In the passage, a servant was hurrying away, face pale. A few yards farther on, one of the cabinet doors near the study stood ajar. A lock dangled, broken. Inside lay a scattering of papers, maps, letters, and one empty folder stamped "Confidential, Wartime Operations." Tuppence crouched, scanning the room. "Someone's been searching." Tommy pointed to the rug, a faint footprint, wet from evening dew. "And recently." Before they could investigate further, Henshaw appeared, his composure so precise it seemed carved. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, I see curiosity still runs in your blood." Tommy straightened. "We heard a noise. The lock's broken." Henshaw's gaze flicked to the cabinet, then back. "An unfortunate mishap. A servant's clumsiness. Nothing more." "Servants rarely carry skeleton keys," Tuppence said mildly. For a moment the mask slipped. His smile vanished. "This is a private residence, Mrs. Beresford. I would ask that you respect that privacy." "Of course," she said, equally smooth, "though I do hope no one was hurt in the mishap." "Quite unnecessary concern." He stepped forward and closed the cabinet door with deliberate finality. "Good night." They watched him leave. Tommy exhaled. "A misunderstanding, he says." Tuppence glanced at the cabinet. "The kind that leaves footprints and broken locks." He smiled grimly. "I think our weekend's about to get interesting." Later in their room, Tuppence couldn't sleep. She replayed the whispered words in her mind. It mustn't leave this house. What was it? Documents? Secrets? Something more dangerous? She rose, peering through the curtain at the moonlit lawns. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Behind her, Tommy murmured drowsily, "Still thinking?" "Always," she said. "Something's wrong here. I can feel it. The air's too polite and the lies too tidy." He yawned. "Then we'll untidy them in the morning." But Tuppence remained at the window, watching shadows shift along the gravel path. In the stillness, she thought she heard it again, the faintest murmur of voices from the drawing-room below. A whisper, rising and falling like the ghost of a warning. And she knew, without knowing how, that the real game at Sanborn Park had only just begun. It began not with thunder, nor lightning, nor any of the dramatic accompaniments so beloved by fiction, but with a scream that was human, raw, and very much alive until it wasn't. The sound ripped through Sanborn Park's tranquil morning like the crack of a rifle. Tuppence, halfway through a letter to an old friend, froze mid-sentence. Tommy, in the corridor outside, dropped his cigarette and was already running. The echo of hurried footsteps and startled cries converged on one place, the library wing. When they reached it, the door stood ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and something metallic. A fire crackled sullenly in the hearth, and beside it, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay Arthur Haddon, the royal secretary, his collar darkened with blood, a silver paper knife buried to the hilt in his chest. Tuppence pressed a hand to her mouth. "Dear heaven." Henshaw appeared behind them, pale but composed, his voice unnervingly measured. "Everyone back, please." But no one moved. Miss Vale was clutching her pearls like a prop she had forgotten to discard. Dr. Pembroke hovered near the door, glasses fogged, muttering impossible to himself. And the general, red-faced and trembling, barked, "Good God, man, call the police!" Henshaw turned on him sharply. "No, that will not be necessary." "No?" The general stared. "A man's been murdered." "This house is under royal protection," Henshaw said, his tone clipped. "There are channels through which this must be handled." The phrase "official channels" had never sounded so sinister. Tommy, crouching beside the body, glanced at the hearth. Amid the dying flames, half-burned papers curled and blackened. He used the tongs to lift one free, the edges charred, the royal monogram faint but visible. Tuppence knelt beside him. "That's the file Haddon was carrying yesterday." "Yes," Tommy murmured. "And someone wanted it gone badly enough to kill for it." Henshaw stepped forward. "Mr. Beresford, I must insist." Tommy rose. "You'll forgive me if I prefer not to tamper with a murder scene, even a royal one." The silence that followed was brittle. By noon the library had been sealed, the guests gathered in the drawing room like unwilling jurors. Henshaw presided at the fireplace, his composure strained but intact. "There has been a tragedy," he began. "Mr. Haddon's death is regrettable. Until the proper authorities arrive, I ask that everyone remain on the estate. Discretion is imperative." Miss Vale gave a dramatic sigh. "Discretion? In a house full of strangers? My dear Lord Henshaw, someone here is a murderer." Dr. Pembroke shifted uneasily. "Perhaps an accident? An intruder?" "The windows were locked," Tommy observed. "And the key to the library?" Tuppence added sweetly. "In your possession, Lord Henshaw?" All eyes turned to him. His smile faltered. "Naturally, though the staff also have access." The butler, a grave figure named Mr. Lyons, stepped forward. "Only myself and 2 footmen, my lord." "Then," said Tuppence lightly, "either your household is dangerously efficient or very unlucky." Henshaw ignored the remark. "We will maintain calm. No speculation, no accusations. Lunch will be served as usual." The command was ludicrous in its civility, but no one argued. Over lunch the tension simmered. Tuppence made a show of nibbling at her soup, while her mind worked like a well-tuned clock. Tommy, across the table, was playing his own part. Affable, unthreatening, the picture of an ex-soldier with more charm than suspicion. When the meal ended, they parted ways with deliberate nonchalance. Tommy sought out the butler, finding him in the corridor near the servants' quarters. "Mr. Lyons," he said pleasantly. "Dreadful business this morning." "Indeed, sir." "You'd known Mr. Haddon long?" "Only since his lordship engaged him, sir, a month ago." Tommy lit a cigarette. "Seem a steady sort to you?" The butler hesitated. "He was anxious, sir, often burning papers in the grate at odd hours. Said they were drafts of speeches for His Majesty, but I've served long enough to know when a man fears his own shadow." "Did he have visitors?" "Not officially, though I did see Miss Vale leaving the library once, after midnight." Tommy's brows rose. "Did you, by Jove?" "Yes, sir. I assumed it was none of my business." "Good instinct," Tommy said, "but terrible luck. Now it's everyone's business." Meanwhile, Tuppence found Miss Vale reclining faintly in her room, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, cigarette holder poised like a weapon of self-defence. "My dear," the actress began dramatically, "you've come to see the poor widow before the inquest." "Widow?" Miss Vale smiled thinly. "Figuratively, of course. Arthur and I were close, though proximity in this house seems to invite misfortune." Tuppence sat, her tone sympathetic but probing. "You cared for him?" "In my way. He admired me enormously, always a dangerous start to any friendship." She exhaled smoke. "He'd grown nervous of late, said there were eyes watching him. He thought someone wanted what he carried." "The documents?" Miss Vale's gaze flicked up. "Documents?" "Oh, come now," said Tuppence lightly. "You were in the library last night." A flicker, guilt, then defiance. "He asked me there, to talk. He was frightened. Said he had something too important to trust even Henshaw with. But when I pressed him, he laughed, and that was the end of it." Tuppence stood, smoothing her skirt. "You're certain?" "My dear Mrs. Beresford," Miss Vale said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, "if I had murdered Arthur, I'd have done it with a better weapon than a letter-opener." Back in the hall, Tuppence met Tommy. "Well," she asked quietly, "she's hiding something." "So is everyone else. The butler saw her sneaking out of the library." Tommy grinned. "Then she's hiding it badly." "Better than the general, who's been pacing like a man rehearsing an alibi." They decided to split up again, Tommy to inspect the study, Tuppence to speak with the historian. Dr. Pembroke was found in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids and gilt. He started when she entered. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford, I was just collecting my thoughts." In a flower pot? She asked sweetly. He blushed. I, needed air. Dr. Pembroke, she said softly, you were one of the last to see Mr. Haddon alive. Was I? His fingers tightened on the railing. I suppose I might have been. You seem nervous. Nonsense. Merely upset. Death has a most disorganizing effect. Especially when it interferes with research, she said. His head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean, said Tuppence calmly, that the file in the library contained wartime records. You're a historian. Surely you'd find that irresistible. He gave a strangled laugh. You think I... My dear lady, those files were nothing to do with my field. Naval strategy, I believe. Indeed, she said. And how do you know that, if you never saw them? He paled. I must go. As the afternoon waned, the estate's grandeur began to feel oppressive. Servants whispered. Doors closed too softly. Every ticking clock seemed to mark the passing of truth into secrecy. Tommy and Tuppence reconvened in the music room. Everyone's frightened, Tommy said. Even Henshaw, especially Henshaw. He forbade the police for a reason, Tommy nodded. Espionage? Possibly. But there's something else. Miss Vale spoke of affection, fear, betrayal. A love affair? Or blackmail? Before he could reply, the General entered abruptly, cigar in hand. The sharp tang of smoke filled the air. Beastly business, he said. Beastly. But we must stay calm. Duty to the Crown and all that. Tuppence eyed the cigar. I thought smoking was forbidden indoors. He blinked. Is it? Apparently not, she murmured. Though curious, considering I smelled cigar smoke in the library this morning. Mr. Haddon didn't smoke. The General froze. Are you accusing me, madam? Not yet, she said, just observing. He puffed furiously. Then observe this. I was in my room all night. Of course, she said lightly. And the cigar? He glared, then stalked out, leaving a trail of blue smoke and questions. Evening settled over Sanborn Park with deceptive calm. The lamps glowed golden against the dusk, casting long, uncertain shadows. Dinner was cancelled. The household moved like ghosts. Tuppence and Tommy returned to the library once Henshaw had retired. The fire had been cleaned, but the faint smell of scorched paper lingered. Tuppence knelt beside the chair where Haddon had fallen. He tried to destroy something, she said. Not just the file, perhaps a letter. She searched carefully, and there, beneath the rug's corner, was a torn fragment of envelope. She lifted it delicately into the lamplight. The paper was thick, cream, embossed with a crown and a single initial, R. The King's monogram, she whispered. Tommy's jaw tightened. So that's what he died for. Or what someone killed him to protect. They stood in silence, the weight of revelation pressing down. Finally, Tuppence said, Whatever's hidden in this house, it touches the throne itself. Tommy gave a low whistle. And you thought we'd been invited for the cucumber sandwiches? She smiled faintly. Next time I'll decline any invitation with a crest on it. But her eyes were thoughtful, intent, because in that torn piece of royal paper she saw not an end, but the opening of a very dangerous game. There are few occasions more absurdly British than a murder inquiry conducted over tea, yet that was precisely how the morning at Sanborn Park unfolded. China cups trembling slightly in nervous hands, silver spoons clinking against porcelain, and the faint scent of bergamot floating through an air already thick with deception. Tuppence Beresford, in dove-grey silk and perfect poise, surveyed the gathering with the mild expression of a hostess hosting nothing more dangerous than gossip. But her mind, sharp and restless, catalogued every hesitation, every too careful phrase. Lord Henshaw had decreed that the police would not be summoned until higher authorities advise, which meant, effectively, that the household was trapped together, with one murderer among them, and no exit save courtesy. Tommy, seated comfortably near the hearth, stirred his tea with deliberate slowness. Since we're all compelled to remain, he said lightly, perhaps we might put the time to constructive use. Nothing formal, of course, just a friendly reconstruction of the evening, where everyone was, what everyone heard. Henshaw stiffened. I hardly think. Merely to clear misunderstandings, Tommy interjected. In the army, we always found a timeline prevented unnecessary suspicion. Miss Vale gave a thin smile. And yet suspicion, like stage light, has a way of illuminating the wrong faces. Indeed, said Tuppence sweetly. But since we're all in the spotlight now, best to show our good sides. There was a ripple of uneasy laughter. Henshaw's resistance wilted under the weight of polite expectation. Very well, he said curtly, if it will settle minds. They began with the General. General Markham, said Tommy, adopting the tone of an amused schoolmaster. Your movements last night? The General puffed out his chest. I retired at 10:30, slept soundly till morning, heard nothing. Nothing? Tuppence asked mildly. Not even the scream. He blinked. Ah, yes, that, but no more than anyone else. Curious, she said, stirring her tea, because Mr. Lyons tells me your boots were polished at midnight. Markham's ruddy complexion deepened. Confounded nonsense, perhaps my valet. You brought no valet? Said Tommy pleasantly. I asked. The General's jaw tightened. I walked the corridor briefly. Insomnia. Nothing sinister about that. Of course not, Tuppence said, voice smooth as cream. Exercise is excellent for the nerves, especially when one's nerves are already on edge. The General glared but said no more. Next came Dr. Pembroke. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief before speaking. I was in the study, he said, reviewing some naval maps Lord Henshaw permitted me to examine. At what hour? Asked Tommy. Until, perhaps 1. Tuppence tilted her head. The same study where the key to the library was kept? Yes indeed, but I never touched it. Of course not, she said softly. You were reading maps. He brightened slightly. Precisely. What sort of maps? His brow furrowed. Coastal defences, wartime positions, all rather dull. Fascinating, said Tommy, considering the burned file in the library contained coded naval correspondence. Pembroke's spoon slipped into his saucer with a sharp clink. Good heavens, how do you know that? Tommy smiled. A little deduction, and a very helpful footman. The historian's protest died on his lips. Miss Vale was next, draped elegantly on the settee, a picture of fragile melancholy. I heard nothing, she said, her voice tremulous. I was asleep, as I told you yesterday. Poor Arthur. Such a dreadful end. Indeed, said Tuppence, though one wonders how you managed to sleep so soundly after visiting the library. The actress's eyes widened. What do you mean? The butler saw you there after midnight. Miss Vale drew herself up. How dare you? Oh, please don't misunderstand, Tuppence said kindly. I only wondered if Mr. Haddon confided anything. About the documents, perhaps. Miss Vale's defiance wavered. He said he was in danger, that someone was watching him. I told him to burn the wretched papers and be done with them. And did he? Her eyes glistened. He tried. Too late. A silence followed, broken only by the faint clatter of a teaspoon against porcelain. Henshaw cleared his throat. This line of questioning borders on the improper, Mrs. Beresford. I think we've indulged enough curiosity for one morning. Tommy smiled blandly. Curiosity, my lord, is the only indulgence that solves crimes. The butler entered quietly with a fresh pot of tea. As he passed behind Tuppence, she caught his eye, a brief flicker of hesitation quickly masked. There it was again, that subtle, protective look. Mr. Lyons, she said gently, you were on duty last night. Yes, madam. Did you see or hear anyone near the library? His pause was fractionally too long. No one, madam. But you heard something, didn't you? He hesitated, then, perhaps a door closing, or the study window. The study, repeated Tommy. Dr. Pembroke's study. Pembroke shifted uncomfortably. You're making much of nothing. Nothing often hides the most, said Tuppence. The tea continued, now merely performance. Polite laughter, strained smiles, and every word a lie waiting to trip over itself. When at last the gathering broke up, the Beresfords stepped into the hall. Well, said Tommy, hands in pockets, we've learned precisely nothing except that everyone's terrified. On the contrary, Tuppence replied, we've learned that the General walks when he shouldn't, the historian studies secrets he shouldn't know, and the actress tells half-truths beautifully, and the butler protects someone. Exactly. They moved toward the library, now cordoned by Henshaw's orders. The fire had been extinguished completely, leaving a faint smell of ash. Tommy crouched near the grate. Burned thoroughly, he said. Almost professional. Look at the pattern. pages fed evenly, not in panic. Which means the killer knew what they were doing, said Tuppence. Not a crime of passion, of purpose. He rose, brushing his hands. Coded wartime correspondence, they said. Could tie to any number of skeletons. Tuppence nodded slowly. But not just any skeleton. This one's royal. Blackmail? Possibly. Or betrayal. Whatever was in those papers, it was worth killing for, and hiding under the king's name. She glanced toward the doorway, where the butler lingered briefly before disappearing down the corridor. Tommy followed her gaze. Still think he's lying? Not lying, she murmured. Protecting. But whether it's loyalty or fear, I'm not yet sure. As the afternoon light shifted across the floorboards, Tuppence poured herself another cup of tea from the abandoned pot. Tommy watched her. You know, I've never trusted tea as a beverage. Too easy to hide poison in. She smiled faintly. Nonsense. Tea only kills when mixed with truth. And we're serving plenty of that, he said dryly. Too much, she replied. Henshaw's desperate to contain the scandal, but you can't cover rot with polish forever. She stirred her tea absently, her reflection rippling in the cup's surface. Tommy leaned against the mantel. So, where do we start? With people's stories, she said. They always crumble faster than the facts. And if none of them did it? Then we find who benefited from it being done. Her eyes drifted toward the tall windows, where sunlight glinted against the polished crest engraved in the glass, the same royal cipher they had seen on the burned file. She spoke softly, almost to herself. Who would kill for the king, and who would kill to protect him? The question hung between them, delicate and dangerous as a spider's thread. And somewhere behind the silence of Sanborn Park's civilized afternoon, that thread was already beginning to pull. It began with a draft, an odd, whispering draft that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Tuppence noticed it as she passed the landing after luncheon, a faint current of cool air where there should have been stillness. The corridor above the library was empty, the air faintly scented with lavender polish and age. Yet somewhere above, something moved. She paused at the foot of the narrow staircase leading to the uppermost floor, the servants' attic. It was unlit, unused, and according to Mr. Lyons, quite out of bounds, which naturally made it irresistible. Tuppence, came Tommy's voice behind her. You've got that expression again. What expression? The one you wear when about to disregard common sense. She smiled. Then it must be working. Come along. Must we? I've just had an excellent pudding. All the more reason to burn it off climbing stairs. Honestly, Tommy, you talk as if curiosity were fatal. He sighed. In our experience, it usually is. But he followed her, as he always did. The staircase creaked protest with each step. Dust motes drifted lazily in the light from a small window high above, illuminating the worn banister and the faded carpet runner. At the top lay a door, paint flaking, keyhole black and empty. Tuppence tried the handle. It resisted at first, then gave way with a sigh that sounded almost human. The attic smelled of old wood and forgotten years. Boxes, trunks and shrouded furniture crowded the space beneath sloping beams. A single bulb hung unlit from the ceiling, the cord swaying faintly in the draught. Well, Tommy murmured, if the murderer isn't up here, the dust certainly is. Hush. She moved carefully between the trunks, her eyes adjusting. Things like this always hide answers, or at least very ugly hats. Tommy pulled a sheet from a nearby object, revealing an old cheval mirror. The glass was mottled with age, reflecting the dim outline of their figures like ghosts uncertain of their shape. Then Tuppence stopped. Look. A large trunk, brass-bound and labelled AH, sat near the far wall. She knelt beside it, brushing off years of neglect. Alistair Henshaw, she murmured. Our host likes his initials. Tommy crouched next to her. Locked. She tried the latch. It opened with surprising ease. Inside lay neatly stacked folders, bundles of letters tied with string, and a photograph frame, its glass cracked. Tuppence lifted it carefully. 3 men stood in uniform, smiling stiffly for the camera. One was unmistakably Henshaw, younger, eyes bright with purpose. The second was Arthur Haddon, his face more open but already touched with anxiety. The third, his image torn away cleanly, leaving only the ghost of a shoulder and the suggestion of a cap, was missing. "Well," said Tommy softly, "someone didn't want him remembered." Tuppence turned the photograph over. In faded ink, Project Lysander, 1943, for the Crown. She frowned. Lysander, a code name. Sounds military or mythological, depending on one's education. There's more. She reached deeper into the trunk and drew out a small ledger bound in dark leather. On its cover, embossed faintly, "Confidential." Tommy whistled low. "You do pick the best souvenirs." The pages were filled with columns of names, dates, and single-word annotations. Transferred, deceased, silent, safe. Near the end, one entry had been heavily crossed out, as though someone had tried to erase it from history. Only 2 letters remained visible. D.W. Tuppence traced it with her finger. "Darrow?" "Captain Darrow," Tommy said, recalling the whispers from the previous day. "The one who died, or didn't?" She nodded slowly. And if this ledger was hidden up here, Henshaw didn't want anyone knowing that Darrow was connected to Project Lysander, or that he might still be alive. The sound of footsteps below made them both freeze. A voice drifted up, measured, polite. "Mr. Lyons." "Lord Henshaw requested that no one enter the attic, madam." Tuppence recovered quickly. "And yet, here you are yourself, Mr. Lyons." He appeared in the doorway, expression neutral but not surprised. "I heard movement. For safety's sake, I came to investigate." Tommy smiled pleasantly. Ever the vigilant servant. The butler's gaze flicked to the open trunk, then to the photograph in Tuppence's hands. "Those are private effects, sir." "Curiosity again," Tuppence said lightly. "Do you know who the third man was?" Lyons hesitated, the faintest muscle tightening in his jaw. "No, madam." "Not even as someone who served the house long?" His eyes met hers briefly, unreadable. "I serve His Majesty, not gossip." Tuppence slipped the photograph into her handbag with a disarming smile. "Then you'll forgive us for tidying. Lord Henshaw really should have his past dusted occasionally." The butler inclined his head. "As you wish, madam." But as he turned to leave, he added quietly, "Some memories are stored away for a reason." When he had gone, Tommy exhaled. He knows exactly who that man is. Of course. The question is, why won't he say? Later in their room, the photograph lay between them on the table, the cracked glass catching the lamplight. Tuppence studied it closely. "There's a faint shadow where the torn piece was, see? The cap badge. It's naval, not army. Pembroke's field." Then Pembroke knew him. "Possibly served with him." She looked thoughtful. Darrow was erased, yet everyone here has some tie to that same wartime circle. Haddon, Henshaw, Pembroke. Even the general, Tommy nodded. And someone's gone to great lengths to keep Project Lysander buried. I'd wager Haddon found something that shouldn't have surfaced. Or someone made sure it didn't, she said. With a paper knife. He smiled faintly. "You're developing quite a taste for intrigue again." "I never lost it. Only lent it to you for a while." That evening brought rain, not dramatic thunder, just the steady patter that softened edges and carried whispers down corridors. Dinner was a muted affair. The guests, weary of pretending, sat with the brittle courtesy of people waiting for news they feared to hear. Henshaw presided at the head of the table, his manner impeccable. Only the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for the salt betrayed strain. Tuppence leaned toward Tommy and murmured, "He knows we found something." "How?" "Because he's not looking at me, which means he's thinking about me." Tommy smiled. "Remind me to stay on your good side." Their exchange was interrupted by Miss Vale's theatrical sigh. "Such dreadful weather. It seeps into the soul. I shall need another sherry simply to endure it." The general grunted. "Weather's the least of our troubles. We're prisoners here, and if I don't get a proper report soon, I'll demand it myself." Henshaw's gaze sharpened. "That would be unwise, General." "Unwise?" "There are matters of state involved. Discretion is paramount." Tuppence caught the flicker of fear in his tone. He wasn't defending the crown. He was defending himself. After dinner, claiming fatigue, she slipped away and climbed again to the attic, alone this time. The bulb's pull cord still swayed faintly, though no wind stirred. She opened the ledger once more, flipping to the crossed-out line. Beneath the ink smudge, she now noticed faint indentations, writing that had pressed through from the next page. She tilted it toward the light, tracing the impression. The words formed slowly. Lysander active. HM aware. Duplicate arranged. Duplicate, she murmured. Duplicate of what? The creak of the floorboard behind her answered nothing and made her blood turn cold. Who's there? A pause, then softly. You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Beresford. Lord Henshaw stepped into the weak light, face grave. Tuppence straightened. You left the trunk unlocked. I assumed it was an invitation. Those are relics, he said quietly. Best left untouched. And the man who's missing from the photograph, was he a relic too? His eyes flicked to the frame. He died long ago. Funny, said Tuppence, his name hasn't. Henshaw regarded her for a long moment. You're clever, Mrs. Beresford. Too clever. I brought you and your husband here because discretion was needed. Don't mistake that for immunity. Her smile didn't waver. And don't mistake my curiosity for carelessness, Lord Henshaw. I rarely trip over the truth without picking it up. A ghost of amusement crossed his face before he turned toward the door. Then tread carefully. The truth at Sanborn Park is more fragile than you think. When he was gone, she let out a slow breath. Later, back in their room, she placed the ledger beside the photograph and looked at Tommy. We've found the missing piece of the puzzle, but not the man who tore it out. He poured her a drink. Project Lysander, duplicates, secret ledgers. If I didn't know better, I'd say we've stumbled into espionage again. Tuppence took the glass, her eyes thoughtful. Or into something worse, treason buried under loyalty. She gazed toward the window. The rain had stopped. In the reflection of the glass, the cracked photograph seemed to glimmer faintly, as though the missing man were trying to step back into the frame. We've opened a door, she said softly, and I don't think it's one we can close again. It was a strange sort of evening, the kind that pretends at peace while something waits in the shadows. Dinner had ended with brittle politeness. Darrow's capture had left the household quieter, but not calmer. Every smile was a mask stretched too tight, every sound a little too sharp. Tuppence noticed it first, the hush that had replaced conversation. It was the hush of fear that doesn't know where to land. Lord Henshaw had excused himself early, claiming fatigue. Tommy had made a note of it the way a detective makes a note of a dagger left too near the table's edge. By 10 o'clock the house had sunk into uneasy stillness. The corridors smelled faintly of candle wax and damp stone. The grandfather clock in the hall struck the hour, the sound rolling through the silence like an accusation. Tommy finished his observation at the window, then followed quietly along the path, keeping low while Tuppence had already circled the other side. Tuppence, in her dressing gown, looked up from the letter she was pretending to write. Henshaw? Vanished. Lyons says he retired, but the bed's untouched, and the study window's open. Then he's up to something. He stubbed out his cigarette. Exactly what I thought. She rose. You're not going alone, Tommy. I wasn't planning to, he said, grinning. But you'll stay in sight, yes? Of course, unless sight becomes inconvenient. The moon hung pale and high over Sanborn Park, silvering the balustrades and setting the pond below agleam like a mirror that knew too much. The air was still, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the low lap of water against the boathouse pilings. Tommy moved along the terrace's edge, footsteps muffled against the flagstones. Below, near the ornamental lake, a lantern flickered once, briefly, then went out. He crouched behind a marble urn, watching. A lone figure, unmistakably Henshaw, his tall frame, his formal coat even at this hour, was striding down toward the boathouse. He moved quickly, glancing behind him only once. Tommy followed, keeping low through the clipped yew hedge. The night smelled of wet grass and something else, gun oil, faint but distinct. The two footmen remained inside, unaware of the nocturnal comings and goings. Halfway down the slope he stopped. Another shadow was moving, silent and deliberate, following Henshaw from the opposite direction. For a moment, Tommy thought it was one of the guards. Then the figure paused where the moon caught it briefly, a gloved hand, a flash of metal, and vanished again into darkness. Tuppence, unseen, was already watching from the other side of the path. She had taken the long way around, her soft shoes soundless on the gravel. She saw what Tommy could not. Henshaw unlocking the boathouse door, stepping inside, and the second figure closing in behind him. She moved closer, every instinct humming. A voice drifted out from the boathouse, Henshaw's, taut but calm. "You shouldn't have come," a lower voice replied, too soft to identify. Then a gunshot shattered the stillness. Tuppence froze. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to stop, the echoes bouncing across the water, then fading into a silence even heavier than before. A splash followed. By the time Tommy reached her side, moments later, the boathouse door was swinging open, banging lightly in the night breeze. "Stay here," he ordered. "Not a chance." They entered together. Inside, the air smelled of oil, rope, and damp wood. A single lantern lay overturned, its flame snuffed. The small rowboat, untethered, was drifting a few yards from the dock, bumping gently against the piling. Tommy crouched and reached for a boathook, snagging it. "Hold this light," he said. Tuppence steadied the lantern as he drew the boat in. Its bottom glistened with water, and something darker. Henshaw was gone. Only his monocle lay on the planks, cracked clean in two, and beside it a sodden scrap of paper, the corner of a letter bearing the royal monogram. Tuppence exhaled softly. Another piece of the king's puzzle. Tommy studied it grimly. Or another body buried under royal secrecy. They searched the surrounding banks until nearly dawn. The mist off the water turned the grass silver. The frogs began their indifferent chorus. There was no sign of Henshaw. Back at the house, Tuppence warmed her hands over the dying embers of the library fire. The clock read 3:30. Tommy poured 2 fingers of brandy and handed her one. No trace, no footprints but his own, and whoever followed him was clever enough to cover them. "He went out to meet someone," she said slowly. "Someone he trusted, or feared enough to obey." Tommy nodded. "And now he's gone the way of Haddon." "Or Darrow." He looked up sharply. "You think Darrow's escape was no accident?" "I think Henshaw arranged it himself," she replied, "to lure someone out. Perhaps the real traitor." "Or perhaps he was running," Tommy said. "A guilty conscience swims faster than any boat." They fell silent, the weight of conjecture pressing down. Finally, Tuppence said, "No one will admit hearing the gunshot. You noticed that?" "I asked Lyons. He said the household heard nothing." "Impossible. It echoed for miles." "Which means," said Tommy grimly, "they were told to say nothing." Morning came with deceptive brightness. The breakfast table was laid as usual, but the mood was funeral. Henshaw's chair at the head sat empty, its untouched napkin folded like a flag of surrender. Dr. Pembroke tried to speak and failed. The General's booming voice had shrunk to a mutter. Miss Vale dabbed her eyes, though no one believed the tears. Tommy and Tuppence entered together. "No word from Lord Henshaw?" asked Tommy. Mr. Lyons, standing discreetly by the sideboard, shook his head. "His lordship is indisposed." "Meaning dead," Tuppence said softly. A faint tightening of the butler's jaw was the only response. "Tell me, Mr. Lyons," Tommy said conversationally, "when you say indisposed, do you speak under orders?" Lyons' gaze flicked briefly to the other guests before returning to Tommy. "Certain matters have been classified. Royal instructions, sir. The situation is to be contained." "Contained?" Tuppence repeated. "A murder on the king's property, and we're to treat it like a spilled teapot." "Those are the instructions." "From whom?" He hesitated. "From above." Tommy sighed. "You'll forgive me if I don't find that reassuring. Above seems to have rather a long reach these days." Lyons inclined his head, refusing to elaborate. "Breakfast will be cleared shortly." Later in the garden, Tommy paced along the terrace edge. Henshaw dies, and suddenly everyone struck deaf, dumb, and patriotic. Royal instructions, my foot. Tuppence followed his gaze toward the boathouse below. The sunlight glittered innocently on the water. "It's clever," she said. "By invoking the king, they turn suspicion into disloyalty. Anyone who questions it becomes unpatriotic." "Exactly," Tommy muttered. "Espionage, blackmail, whatever this is, it's wrapped in the flag. Perfect camouflage." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Do you remember what Darrow said? Duplicate arranged. I think that's what's really being protected. Not a man, but an idea. Someone else pretending to be the king's double. Someone still alive." Tommy frowned. "Then why kill Henshaw?" "Because he knew which was which." He gave a low whistle. "If you're right, we're not chasing spies, we're chasing ghosts. Doubles, imposters, secrets within secrets." Precisely, she said, and the king's name is the weapon that hides them. By afternoon, tension had crept into every corner of Sanborn Park. Servants moved in hushed pairs. The guests avoided one another's eyes. The police still hadn't been summoned. Tuppence sat in the drawing room pretending to read, while Lyons passed by carrying a sealed envelope. She caught a glimpse of the crest. "Another royal letter?" she asked lightly. His pause was brief but telling. "Routine correspondence." "Of course," she said. "The usual sort that comes after people vanish into lakes." He gave a small, almost weary smile. "Mrs. Beresford, you and your husband are clever people. You'll understand that certain truths do more harm than lies." "Only to those who profit from them," she replied. For the first time, his composure faltered. "If you value your safety, leave before the evening." When he was gone, she exhaled. Tommy entered moments later. What was that about? An invitation to retreat. Tempted? Not in the slightest. He grinned. "Good, because I've just found something better than breakfast gossip. Come and see." He led her to the study. On Henshaw's desk, half hidden under blotting paper, lay a small notebook. The ink was fresh, the handwriting hurried. Tuppence read aloud. "If I fail to make contact by midnight, the truth lies in the water." She looked up sharply. "Midnight? That was last night." Tommy nodded. "And whatever he meant by truth, it went down with him. Or it's still there." Her gaze turned toward the window overlooking the lake. "If I were hiding evidence, I'd choose somewhere no one would dare disturb, under the king's own reflection." He smiled admiringly. "Which means we're going fishing." That night, while the others retired under orders of rest, the Beresfords returned to the terrace. The moon was out again, soft and watchful, lighting the path to the boathouse. The water was calm, save for the faint ripple of reeds. Tommy rowed while Tuppence held the lantern low, scanning the surface. "There," she said suddenly, "something glinting by the piling." He manoeuvred closer. The lantern's glow caught a chain, thin, delicate, attached to something heavy below. He hooked it carefully and pulled. A small metal box broke the surface, dripping and glimmering. Tuppence wiped the mud away. "Military issue." Tommy pried it open with his penknife. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 photographs, and a letter stamped with the royal cipher. The first photograph showed Henshaw beside a man identical to the king, 2 identical. The second, the same man signing documents under supervision. The third, a corpse, face burned, labelled Captain Darrow. Tuppence whispered, "Good Lord, they killed the double and claimed it was him." "The real Darrow," Tommy murmured, "was kept alive in secret, as the second king." She looked up at him. Then Henshaw was silenced for uncovering the wrong truth. Not that a double existed, but that the double ruled. Tommy closed the box. "If that's true, then this is the most dangerous evidence in England." They exchanged a look that held no triumph, only dread. As they stepped back onto the terrace, Tuppence paused. The air had changed, thicker, charged. She turned. Someone stood at the top of the steps. "Mr. Lyons." "Hand it over," he said quietly. Tommy's hand moved toward his coat, but Lyons shook his head. "No need for heroics, sir. His Majesty's command." Tuppence's voice was calm. "Is it, or yours?" Lyons hesitated, and for the first time they saw it, the exhaustion in his face, the sorrow behind the loyalty. "I serve the crown," he said softly, "not the men who hide behind it, but some truths can destroy what little faith we have left." Tuppence met his eyes. Faith isn't built on silence. For a moment, the 3 of them stood motionless under the moonlight, the detectives, the servant, the secret that could topple kings. Then Lyons lowered his hand. "Go," he said. "Take it. Leave before they arrive." "Who?" Tommy asked. "Those who clean up after kings." And as they hurried back toward the house, the sound of engines echoed faintly from the road beyond the gates, black cars approaching through the night. The first tears looked rehearsed. The second, however, were not. Miss Lillian Vale, the woman who had survived 20 curtain calls, 3 husbands and 1 world war, now sat trembling in an armchair, her rouge streaked and her composure dissolving like powder in the rain. The performance had ended. Only the truth remained, raw and graceless. Tuppence knelt beside her, offering a handkerchief and a look of quiet understanding. "Take your time, Miss Vale. It's always worse when one's been carrying something alone." The actress gave a strangled laugh. "Alone? My dear Mrs. Beresford, I've had company enough. Ghosts, memories, debts." Tommy, standing by the fireplace, leaned on the mantel. "And one ghost in particular, perhaps?" Miss Vale's hands fluttered like pale birds. "You know, then?" "Not yet," said Tuppence gently, "but I think you're about to tell us." For a moment, only the faint ticking of the clock broke the silence. Then Miss Vale spoke, the words spilling in halting bursts. "I knew him long before the war. Edward Darrow, Captain Darrow to the rest of the world. He was dazzling in those days, all charm and ambition. He could make you believe the sun rose simply to oblige him. I was foolish, and I adored him. He said I was the only woman who truly saw him." She gave a mirthless smile, which turned out to be true in a way. "I saw him too well." Tommy's tone was mild. "You discovered his secrets?" "Yes." She stared into the fire as though reading scenes from her own life. "When the war came, he was recruited into something special, something so secret he could barely speak of it. He hinted it was a matter of national survival. I believed him. He came back changed, harder, colder, and with eyes that had learned the value of silence." Tuppence asked softly, "And afterward?" "He left me. No farewell, no explanation, just gone. Years later he returned, uninvited. He said he'd been betrayed, that those he served had discarded him. He wanted money, and he knew precisely how to ask." "Blackmail," said Tommy. She flinched. Such an ugly word for so elegant a crime. He had letters, mine, of course. Foolish, romantic, indiscreet. He made me pay to keep them buried. I thought that was the end of it. "And it wasn't?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw him again, 3 weeks ago." The words hung like a dropped glass, fragile and final. Tommy's eyes narrowed. "3 weeks ago? Where?" "In London, at Claridge's. I was dining with a producer. He passed our table. Same face, same voice, but different name. He wore diplomatic dress, carried himself like a man of importance. I thought I was seeing a ghost until he smiled. That same wicked, knowing smile." "You spoke to him?" asked Tuppence. "No, I couldn't. He vanished before dessert. I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I arrived here at Sanborn and saw Arthur Haddon, I realized I hadn't." "Haddon recognized him too," said Tommy slowly. She nodded. "Yes. I saw the fear in his eyes. He tried to speak to Lord Henshaw that night, but Henshaw brushed him off. Then," her voice faltered, "then Haddon was dead." Tuppence reached out, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "You believe Darrow killed him?" The actress gave a weary shrug. "If he's still alive, he kills everything he touches. Hope, reputation, people. The man's an infection." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. "And yet, Miss Vale, one question remains. Why come here at all? Why accept the invitation?" Miss Vale gave a shaky smile. "Because I was told to." "By whom?" She hesitated. "The letter bore the king's seal. When the king summons you, you don't refuse." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "Except the king didn't write it, did he?" The actress closed her eyes. "No, I know that now." When Miss Vale finally drifted into exhausted silence, Tuppence guided her to rest on the chaise. As the actress dabbed at her eyes, Tuppence discreetly reached for the handkerchief Miss Vale had dropped onto the floor. The embroidered corner caught her attention, a looping D in gold thread. She folded it calmly into her sleeve. Tommy, still at the mantel, said quietly, "She's telling the truth, or most of it. You can't fake that kind of fear." Tuppence nodded. "And yet she's still acting. There's something she's not saying, perhaps about that handkerchief, perhaps about the letter. But for now, we let her believe she's safe." They stepped out into the corridor, closing the door gently behind them. The hallway smelled faintly of polish and smoke from the downstairs hearth. Tommy ran a hand through his hair. "So Darrow lived, blackmailed his lover, impersonated a diplomat, and turned up here to tie loose ends. That's quite a curriculum vitae." "And yet," Tuppence mused, "none of it explains why the others are so terrified. Henshaw, Pembroke, even the butler, they're all protecting something larger than scandal." "Something royal," said Tommy grimly. Every clue leads back to the crown. Letters, seals, secrecy. Tuppence's expression hardened. Then we'd better start treating this as treason, not romance. They returned to the library, where the remnants of the burned documents still lay in the hearth. Tommy fetched a magnifying glass from the desk and crouched by the ashes. "Bit of luck," he murmured. "Some of the paper didn't burn cleanly." He used a letter opener to lift a corner. The ink had run, but fragments of words remained visible in dark blotches. Lysander, duplicate established, royal approval required. He spread them on the blotter. "Duplicate's approval, Lysander, it's all the same thread." Tuppence leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. "Look here. These letters. See the faint impression. The king's double." Tommy stared. "You're certain?" She nodded. The secretary wasn't just dealing with stolen documents. He'd uncovered proof of impersonation. Someone, perhaps Darrow himself, had impersonated the king. Tommy gave a low whistle. "Good Lord. If that got out, it would wreck the monarchy." "Exactly," Tuppence said, "and it explains everything. Haddon knew, Henshaw knew, even Lyons in his way knows. But someone higher up decided the only safe secret is a dead one." The door creaked open behind them. They turned sharply. It was Lyons himself, holding a tray with quiet dignity. "Tea, madam, sir." His gaze flicked to the papers spread across the desk. "I see curiosity remains unquenchable." Tuppence met his eyes. "We're only trying to understand why people keep dying." He set down the tray with perfect composure. "Some truths," he said, "carry a death sentence by nature, not decree." "Then we're already guilty," said Tommy lightly. Lyons gave a small, regretful nod. "Indeed, sir. I suggest you take your tea while you may still enjoy it." He withdrew silently, closing the door behind him. Tuppence exhaled. "He's not threatening us, Tommy. He's warning us." "Yes," Tommy said grimly. "And when a man like Lyons warns you, he's already arranged the next chapter." They drank the tea anyway, because it was hot, and because defiance in the Beresford household was best served with sugar. Tuppence stirred hers idly, eyes fixed on the dying fire. "Do you realize what this means, Tommy? All those whispers about loyalty and discretion. Project Lysander wasn't just a cover operation. It was identity theft at the level of a nation." Tommy nodded slowly. "A royal double, hidden to protect the king during the war. Then afterward, maybe that double refused to disappear. A second monarch in the shadows." "Or a puppet," she said softly, "used by those who preferred control to chaos." He sighed. "And Haddon found proof. And paid the price." She set down her cup, her tone steady but low. "This is no longer about Darrow's survival. It's about the monarchy's. And if what Miss Vale said is true, someone has been playing the part of His Majesty in more ways than one." Tommy gave her a long, thoughtful look. "If you're right, we're walking through a hall of mirrors, and only one reflection is real." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were cold. "Then we'd better find the real one before the next mirror shatters." In the dimming light, the fire crackled once, spitting up a spark that flared briefly before dying. It illuminated the words on the half-burned page one last time. The King's Double. Operation continued under discretion of the Crown. Tuppence's voice, when it came, was quiet but certain. "It's not just a scandal, Tommy. It's history rewritten." He nodded. "And it's still being written, by someone willing to kill for the ending." They both looked toward the closed library door, where the faintest shadow moved past, silent, watching, gone. And somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck midnight, marking not the end of confession, but the beginning of exposure. The portrait loomed over the great hall like a silent witness, an enormous oil painting of King George VI, his gaze steady, benevolent, and, as Tuppence now noticed, strangely familiar. It was nearly dawn when she stood before it, unable to sleep. The discovery of the King's Double had unsettled her in a way few things could. She had faced murderers, liars, and even bored aristocrats before breakfast, but treason painted in royal colours, that was another matter entirely. Tommy joined her quietly, cup of coffee in hand. "You're staring at him as if he might blink." "He might," she murmured. "If the story we're uncovering is true, he, or someone who looks exactly like him, already has." He followed her gaze. "Do you think this is the real king, or the double? That's the question, isn't it? She tilted her head, studying the brushwork. The painter captured something off. The eyes are softer than photographs I've seen, more uncertain. Tommy smiled faintly. Maybe the poor chap was just tired of being painted. Or tired of being someone else. By mid-morning, the estate had transformed once again, this time into a place pretending normality. Servants resumed their duties, though their movements were mechanical. The guests, those who remained, whispered in corners. No one mentioned Lord Henshaw. No one dared. Lyons approached them in the corridor, his expression composed but pale. "Breakfast is served, Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, and a message has arrived from London." He handed Tommy an envelope marked urgent, confidential. Tommy broke the seal and scanned the note, his brow furrowing. "It's from Carter again. Double confirmed, compromised operative within household. Secure evidence immediately. Avoid official channels." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's cheerful. Means someone here still works for the wrong side, or the wrong king." At breakfast, the atmosphere was thick enough to slice with the silver. Miss Vale looked pale but composed, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted her cup. Dr. Pembroke pretended to read a newspaper, though it was upside down. Tommy tried his usual charm. "Sleep well, everyone?" The general gave a grunt. "Like a man under fire." Pembroke muttered, "A most apt metaphor." Tuppence, eyes bright with feigned innocence, said, "It's a peculiar thing, how noise travels in this house. One can hear the grandfather clock from anywhere, but apparently not gunshots." Miss Vale flinched. Lyons, serving toast, did not even blink. When the silence became unbearable, Tuppence rose. "If you'll excuse me, I'd like another look at the library portrait. It's rather captivating in daylight." The great hall was flooded with morning light when she returned to the painting. The gilded frame gleamed like treasure, the royal eyes seeming almost alive. But it wasn't the eyes that drew her, it was the frame itself. A faint draught whispered near its base. She touched the lower panel. It moved. "Tommy," she called softly. He joined her, setting down his teacup. "What is it?" "Help me lift this corner." Together they eased the massive portrait forward. Behind it, instead of bare wall, was a narrow recess, lined with faded wallpaper and a small iron door, no larger than a cupboard, with an old lock. "Well," Tommy said, "that's very obliging of His Majesty." Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Fetch that letter opener. Let's see what our king's shadow was hiding." The lock resisted, but gave way with a reluctant click. Inside was a wooden box covered in dust, stamped Private A. H. Henshaw's initials. The box contained a single leather folder tied with string. Inside lay papers more astonishing than either dared imagine. A typed memorandum marked Most Secret, dated 1943. Subject: Project Lysander. Continuation plan. In event of death or incapacity of the sovereign, Operation Double Crown will proceed. Designated stand-in authorized to assume limited ceremonial duties to preserve national morale. Tuppence inhaled sharply. Operation Double Crown. Tommy, they prepared for the king's death by appointing a replacement, a look-alike. He scanned the second page. And not just wartime. There's a clause for extension of cover in peace to ensure continuity of faith. That's breathtakingly audacious. Her eyes flicked to the bottom. Signed, Alistair Henshaw, Royal Liaison, and Edward Darrow, Field Coordinator. Tommy gave a low whistle. So Henshaw wasn't just a host, he was the architect, and Darrow was his creation. And when Darrow turned on him, Tuppence said, the whole illusion began to crack. A sudden sound made them both freeze, a door closing somewhere behind them. Lyon's voice came quietly from the doorway. "I thought I might find you here." Tommy straightened, expression mild, admiring the decor. "Indeed," said Lyons. His gaze shifted to the folder in Tuppence's hand. "You found the archive." "Would you call it that?" Tuppence asked evenly. "Or evidence?" The butler's face was unreadable. "It depends who asks." "Mr. Lyons," Tommy said, "why not tell us what this really is? You've been guarding more than silver." A pause. Then Lyons sighed, as if releasing years of restraint. "I was attached to military intelligence during the war. When Operation Lysander began, I was liaison to the palace. I swore an oath, not to a man, but to stability. The country had survived too much to endure scandal. The double was necessary, for morale, for faith. And afterward? Asked Tuppence. Lyons looked weary. Afterward, the double refused to step aside. The real king was ill. They kept it quiet. Darrow filled in at ceremonies, handshakes, signatures. When the king recovered, Darrow was compensated to disappear. Compensated, Tommy repeated. A pleasant euphemism. Lyons' voice hardened. The crown needed silence. Henshaw saw to it. But Darrow wanted recognition. Money, perhaps, or vindication. He came back. Henshaw called you here to contain it. And then someone contained Henshaw, said Tuppence. Yes. The butler stepped closer, lowering his voice. You must understand, Mrs. Beresford, the monarchy cannot afford exposure. Nations collapse over smaller lies. Then you'll forgive us, she said coldly, if we side with the truth instead of treason dressed in velvet. Lyons met her gaze. You're braver than most, but bravery won't save you when they arrive. They? Asked Tommy. Lyons hesitated. The men from Whitehall. They'll erase every trace of this, including you, if necessary. Charming, said Tommy. And how soon should we expect our erasure? Before nightfall, Lyons said quietly. Take what you've found and go. You've seen too much already. Tuppence looked at him searchingly. Why warn us, Mr. Lyons? Because someone should remember, he said simply, and because Mrs. Beresford reminds me of someone who once believed in justice. When he left, silence returned like a curtain. Tommy exhaled. Well, that's the first time a butler's confession included treason and tenderness. Tuppence's eyes were on the portrait. We can't leave, Tommy. Not yet. Not until we know how deep this goes. He frowned. You're thinking of the real king? I'm thinking of the people who deserve the truth, she said. If the crown rests on deceit, it's no crown at all. Tommy gave a small, resigned smile. I knew you'd say that. Besides, she added, we can't outrun Whitehall in your motor car. It still wheezes uphill. Thank you for the vote of confidence. They spent the next hour combing through the remaining contents of the box. Correspondence, coded messages, and one photograph more damning than the rest. Darrow shaking hands with a man unmistakably royal, yet subtly wrong. The eyes, the posture, too deliberate. On the back, in Henshaw's handwriting, continuity secured, God save them both. Tuppence's hand trembled slightly. He believed it was patriotic. Tommy looked grim. And now 2 men are dead for the same reason. She folded the papers back into the folder, tying the string firmly. Then we'll deliver this to Carter ourselves. If anyone can protect the truth, it's him. And if he can't, then at least the truth will die trying. As they replaced the portrait, something fluttered loose, a smaller photograph that had been wedged behind the frame. It showed Henshaw, Lyons, and a third man in uniform, tall, dark-haired, with the faintest trace of a smile. On the reverse, Sandbourne, 1946. The day we chose our king. Tuppence stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into her coat. The afternoon waned into a deceptive calm. Cars arrived at the front gates, black, unmarked. Men in dark coats stepped out with the precision of shadows. Tommy glanced through the window. Looks like Lyons wasn't exaggerating. Tuppence squared her shoulders. Then we mustn't waste the warning. She tucked the folder inside her bag. If they take us, at least they'll have to take the evidence too. He smiled faintly. Remind me why I ever doubted your sense of adventure. Because you have one yourself. They moved quickly through the servants' corridor toward the rear of the house. The air smelled of soap and candle soot. Somewhere upstairs a radio played faintly. News about royal engagements and goodwill tours. Tuppence murmured, how ironic. The king smiles for the cameras while his ghosts guard the truth. Let's make sure those ghosts don't win, Tommy said. They slipped out onto the back lawn just as the first of the officials entered through the front. The wind carried their clipped voices across the terrace. Secure the premises. No one leaves without authorization. Tuppence pulled Tommy toward the hedge path leading to the stables. Behind them, footsteps echoed, growing nearer. Quickly, she whispered. They ducked into the shadows as the men passed, their polished shoes crunching on the gravel. Tommy grinned, breathless. You know, this reminds me of that time in Belgium. Except this time, she whispered, we're not running from spies, we're running from history. They reached the stables just as the church bells began to toll in the distance. From there they could see the portrait through the open hall window, the king's painted face calm and unchanged, watching as if amused by their flight. Tuppence's voice was low but steady. That portrait isn't of the real King, Tommy. I'm sure of it now. He followed her gaze. Then who is it? She hesitated. Perhaps the man who played him so well the world never knew the difference. The bells continued to toll, steady, solemn, relentless. Tommy took her hand. Come on, partner. We've got one more act before the curtain falls. The drawing room had been stripped of its pretense. Gone were the polite murmurings, the brittle laughter, the clink of china. In their place lingered tension, thick, electric, alive. Tommy and Tuppence stood by the hearth, flanked by two plainclothes men from London whose inspection had lasted hours and yielded nothing but silence. The remaining guests huddled together like figures in a painting left unfinished. Miss Vale's eyes darted between them all. Dr. Pembroke sat rigidly, his hands clenched white around his cane. The general, square-jawed, hard-eyed, a man built of duty and arrogance, stood apart, his military posture too perfect to be comfortable. Tommy glanced toward Tuppence. I suppose now we're meant to pretend none of this happened. The general barked a mirthless laugh. Pretend, my dear Beresford, pretense is the very mortar of empire. Tuppence tilted her head. Funny sort of mortar. It seems to crack under pressure. His mouth twisted. Only when the wrong people start digging. The remark hung there, half insult, half confession. Lyons entered quietly, a tray balanced perfectly in his hands. His calm presence, after so much turmoil, was almost eerie. Tea, sir? Madam? No, thank you, said Tuppence. The general sneered. You serve tea after treason? Lyons placed the tray down. I serve my duty, General. Something in his tone made Tommy glance up sharply. Lyons wasn't the same deferential butler who'd once fetched tea and guarded silences. There was steel beneath the civility now, a quiet authority that felt military, not domestic. Duty, the general repeated, pacing slowly. That word has killed more men than any bullet. Yet, it's the only thing that keeps the rest alive, said Lyons evenly. The general stopped. His eyes, grey and cold as gunmetal, flicked between them. You talk like a soldier. I was one, Lyons said simply. A pause followed. A small, perfect silence that broke something open in the room. Tommy leaned back against the mantel. Well, now we've enough uniforms in this room to start a parade. Perhaps one of you might tell us who's actually giving orders. The general's laugh was low, ugly. You think I take orders now? Tuppence studied him. His hands trembled, not from age, but from something far more dangerous. Restraint. You've been restless all day, she said softly, since the mention of Project Lysander, since we found that portrait. His gaze snapped to hers. You know nothing about it. Oh, but I do. I know you were there. I know you served under a false flag. And I know the one thing a soldier never forgives. Betrayal. He stiffened, eyes narrowing. Careful, Mrs. Beresford. Tommy stepped forward. You were more than a soldier, weren't you? You were inside Lysander. You knew the king's double existed. The general's face flushed. I didn't know at first. They kept it from me, told me I was serving the crown, when in truth I was saluting an impostor. I led men into battle for a ghost. The last word cracked the air like a shot. Miss Vale gasped. Pembroke shrank into his chair. Tuppence's voice was steady. Then you're not General Ashcroft. He smiled, slow and terrible. No, not Ashcroft. That was the name they gave me when they decided the real one was too dangerous to live. Tommy's breath caught. Captain Edward Darrow. The man's shoulders straightened. At last. The truth seemed to warp the very air in the room. The figure who'd lectured on honour, who'd barked orders at breakfast and sneered at weakness, this was the ghost returned in flesh. Darrow's voice dropped to a low, almost reverent tone. They thought they could erase me. But you can't kill a man who never truly existed. You can only bury him under medals. Tuppence said, and so you dug yourself out, through murder. He met her eyes, unflinching. Through justice. Haddon knew. Henshaw knew. They signed my death warrant the day they forged the king's name. When I came back, they begged for secrecy, called it patriotism. I call it treason. Patriotism, said Tommy, seems to be doing a roaring trade in hypocrisy tonight. Darrow's lip curled. You talk like a politician, Beresford. I've killed enough of those to know the type. Tuppence moved subtly, placing herself between Tommy and the desk. Her hand brushed the silk cord hanging beside it, the bell for summoning staff, though in Sanborn Park it was wired to a more modern system, the estate alarm. You're wrong, you know, she said quietly. The king didn't betray you. Henshaw did. Darrow was sacrificed to keep the peace. It's monstrous, yes, but the answer isn't more blood. He laughed sharply. Peace built on lies is no peace at all. I served a phantom king, now I'll serve truth. He drew a pistol from his coat, black and gleaming. Truth rarely travels armed, said Tommy, keeping his tone casual. Put it down, old man. There's still a chance to walk out with your dignity. Dignity? Darrow's voice shook with rage. They stripped me of that 20 years ago. He raised the pistol, levelling it at Lyons. And you, guardian of crowns and secrets, how many names have you erased in the name of order? Lyons did not flinch. Enough to recognize the look in your eyes. You don't want justice, Captain. You want an audience. For a moment the room seemed to freeze, the painting above the mantel, the ticking clock, even the dust motes suspended mid-air. Then Tuppence moved, a small, deliberate step backward, just enough for her hand to close around the alarm cord. She yanked it. A shrill metallic bell shattered the silence. Darrow swung toward her, fury blazing. You fool! Tommy lunged, grabbing his arm. The pistol went off, the shot tearing a hole through the portrait above them, splintering the king's painted smile into fragments of smoke and canvas. Lyons moved with astonishing speed. In one smooth motion he caught Darrow's wrist, twisting until the gun clattered to the floor. The older man struggled, snarling, but Lyons' grip was iron. Let go, Darrow shouted. You think this will save your king, your puppet? Lyons forced him to his knees, voice low and precise. I'm not saving him. I'm saving what's left of us. The bell's echo faded, replaced by the pounding of footsteps in the corridor, guards rushing in. Tommy straightened, brushing dust from his sleeve. Good heavens. And people say country weekends are dull. When the guards entered, Lyons gestured curtly. Take him to the cellar. Keep him under lock until Colonel Carter's men arrive. Darrow stopped struggling, his fury collapsing into something colder. You'll bury me again, he said softly. But you can't bury the truth. Lyons looked down at him. No, but sometimes it's kinder to let it rest. The general's eyes burned with defiance. You think the truth serves mercy. It serves no one but itself. As they dragged him away, Tuppence felt the faintest pang of pity. Whatever else he had become, he had once been a man betrayed by the country he served. Later, when the others had dispersed and the house returned to uneasy quiet, Tommy found Tuppence by the shattered portrait. The air still smelled of powder and varnish. Carter's on his way, he said. He'll take the files, the ledger, the whole tangle of lies, and then, I imagine, the record will show nothing happened here at all. She nodded, staring at the hole where the king's eyes had been. Nothing except that a man killed for loyalty, and another killed for silence. History won't know the difference. No, she said softly, but we will. Lyons entered, his face drawn but steady. They've taken him below. Colonel Carter should arrive within the hour. Will the truth ever come out? Asked Tuppence. Lyons hesitated. Perhaps, when it can do no more harm. Tommy studied him. You knew all along, didn't you? Every lie, every disappearance. Lyons met his gaze. I've known since the beginning. It was my task to protect a symbol, not a man. Symbols endure, men perish. Tuppence looked at him for a long moment. And do you still believe that's worth the cost? Lyons' voice softened. Belief isn't a luxury we're allowed, Mrs. Beresford, only obedience. He bowed slightly and left. The fire had burned low. Tuppence sank into a chair, exhaustion catching up with her. It's strange, isn't it? Everyone was fighting for the same thing, honour, duty, loyalty, and yet it led them all to betrayal. Tommy poured 2 drinks and handed her one. There's a razor's edge between those words. patriotism on one side, vanity on the other. She smiled faintly. You do grow philosophical after gunfire. Necessity, he said. Otherwise one starts thinking the world's gone entirely mad. She raised her glass. To the ghosts of Sanborn Park. He clinked his against hers. And to the living who'll never know what we buried tonight. Outside, the morning mist rolled across the lawns, erasing footprints, softening the outlines of truth. In the cellar below, Darrow, once captain, now convict, sat in the dark, humming a marching tune under his breath. His voice was rough, defiant, human. In another hour, Carter's men would arrive, and the official story would be written. A tragic accident, a loyal servant's sacrifice, the matter resolved. But upstairs, beneath the ruined portrait, 2 detectives sat in silence, knowing that resolution was merely another name for cover-up. Tuppence broke the quiet. Do you think it was worth it? For them, I mean. The secrecy, the sacrifice. Tommy's reply was soft. I think they convinced themselves it was, and that's the most dangerous conviction of all. The clock struck 8. Somewhere beyond the window, a bird began to sing, oblivious, unburdened. Tuppence rose, smoothing her skirt. Come along, Tommy. We've done what we can. Let history lie to itself if it must. He followed her toward the door. As long as we don't lie to each other, she smiled. We never have. And as they stepped into the corridor, the broken portrait watched over them, its royal face fractured but enduring, a reminder that even in the grandest halls, truth has a way of cracking through the paint. Dawn came shyly to Sanborn Park. It spilled in through high windows and onto marble floors as though uncertain it was welcome after such a night. The estate, so recently a stage for intrigue and violence, now wore its calm like powder over bruises, impeccable but fragile. Outside, a lorry from London stood at the front steps. Men in plain suits moved briskly, murmuring to one another as they carried crates and files into their vehicles. To any onlooker, it might have been a delivery. In truth, it was an erasure. Tuppence watched from the upper landing, arms folded. She could almost believe it hadn't happened. The gunshot, the portrait shattering, the man dragged away in chains. The air smelled faintly of polish and smoke, and the world seemed to have conspired to tidy itself. Tommy joined her, adjusting his cufflinks. Efficient fellows, you have to hand it to Whitehall. They can bury a scandal before breakfast. Or a conscience, she murmured. He smiled wryly. I was trying to be charitable, always a mistake before tea. Downstairs, the drawing-room had been restored to deceptive order. The damaged portrait was gone, replaced by an innocuous landscape. The broken glass had vanished. Only a faint scorch mark above the mantel hinted at last night's upheaval. Lyons stood by the window, speaking quietly to an officer. His demeanour was unreadable again. No trace of the man who had wrestled a gun from a traitor's hand. When the officer left, he turned toward them, bowing slightly. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, your car will be ready shortly. The Crown thanks you for your discretion. Tommy raised an eyebrow. I notice it's always discretion they thank us for, never the danger. Lyons' lips curved faintly. Danger can be thanked privately, sir. Discretion keeps the kingdom running. Tuppence studied him. And what happens to the captain now? He'll stand before a quiet tribunal, Lyons said. No record, no press. Officially, he never returned from the war. And Henshaw will be buried with honours befitting a loyal servant. She nodded slowly. Loyal to whom, I wonder? For a brief instant, something flickered behind Lyons' eyes. Weariness, perhaps even regret. In this house, madam, loyalty is its own answer. Then he inclined his head and withdrew, leaving them alone once more. Tommy poured tea from the tray a servant had left. The delicate china rattled faintly against the saucers as though protesting the weight of unsaid things. He handed her a cup. Here we are. Proper British closure. Treason concluded. Tea poured. Silence restored. Tuppence stirred hers thoughtfully. It's remarkable, isn't it? The speed with which the world corrects itself. One night there's a man with a gun and the truth in his mouth. The next, there's only the rustle of linen and the scent of Earl Grey. Tommy leaned back. That's England for you. We hide our revolutions in teapots. She smiled faintly. You should have been a poet, Tommy. God forbid. They're always broke, and I do so enjoy breakfast. He took a sip, then added, Truth, like tea, should never be left to steep too long. Gets bitter. Tuppence's eyes softened. Then perhaps we should drink it quickly while it's still bearable. He nodded toward the window where the last of the officials were departing. Our friends from the palace seem to agree. By tomorrow, Sanborn will be a royal retreat again, clean, respectable, and entirely innocent. Do you think it ever was? Probably not, but innocence is just a story told often enough to sound true. They took one last walk through the gardens before leaving. The air was crisp, the morning light filtering through wet leaves. Somewhere near the lake, a gardener was already raking gravel into neat, obedient lines. Tommy glanced toward the water. Strange to think of what's lying beneath that surface. Secrets don't drown here, they merely wait. Tuppence's gaze followed his. You're becoming almost poetic again. He chuckled. Give me another cup of tea and I'll start quoting Tennyson. They reached the gatehouse where their car waited, the driver standing at attention. Lyons appeared once more to see them off. I hope, he said, you'll find the rest of your holiday less eventful. Tommy grinned. We always do, until the next invitation. Tuppence extended her hand. Take care of yourself, Mr. Lyons. He hesitated before taking it. And you, Mrs. Beresford. You both see too much. Try not to see too far. As the car door closed, she looked back once. Lyons was still standing by the gate, a solitary figure framed by the rising sun. The motor car hummed along the long drive, tires whispering over damp gravel. Beyond the hedges, the countryside stretched out in serene indifference, villages waking, smoke curling from chimneys, the ordinary rhythm of a country that would never know what had been saved or lost at Sanborn Park. Tommy glanced at his wife. You're quiet. I'm thinking, she said. That's what worries me. She smiled faintly. I was wondering how many secrets England keeps behind its polished doors. How many names have been erased for the sake of appearances. He looked ahead at the winding road. Enough to fill a library, but perhaps it's for the best. People like their kings unblemished and their tea unsweetened. She turned toward him. And you? How do you like your truth? He grinned. In small doses, served hot, and preferably accompanied by toast. Her laughter came softly, genuine for the first time that morning. Oh, Tommy, you really are impossible. Impossible, he said, but consistent. That's something. As they passed through the wrought iron gates, Tuppence looked back at the manor one last time. The windows gleamed in the early light, polite and inscrutable. The sound of the gate closing echoed like the final line of a play. She thought of Haddon's frightened eyes, of Henshaw's trembling hand, of Darrow's bitterness and Lyon's weary loyalty, all of them caught in the same web, spun from patriotism and pride. Do you think they were right, Tommy? She asked quietly. To protect the lie? He considered it. Right? No. Necessary? Perhaps. A kingdom runs on belief as much as blood. Remove one and the other loses its purpose. Tuppence rested her head against the seat, watching the countryside roll by. Then I suppose we've served belief again, not truth. He reached for her hand. Truth has a habit of surviving, even when buried. Someone will find it one day. Perhaps, she said, but by then the ghosts will be gone, and no one will remember why it mattered. The car turned onto the main road, the estate vanishing behind a line of trees. For a moment, all that remained was the faint echo of a gunshot, imagined or remembered, folding itself neatly into history. Tommy broke the silence with a sigh. Well, darling, I think we've earned our breakfast, Tuppence smiled. And a strong pot of tea. He chuckled. Naturally. After all, treason or no treason, the British Empire was built on it. Their laughter mingled with the hum of the engine as the car disappeared down the sunlit road, two silhouettes against the bright morning, leaving behind a house that would never speak, and a secret England would never tell. A few weeks later, it was raining in Chelsea, not the dramatic, cinematic sort of rain that inspired poets, but the honest, workaday drizzle that Londoners wore like a second skin. Inside their modest yet agreeably cluttered flat, Tommy Beresford sat at the breakfast table, half hidden behind the Times. Across from him, Tuppence was engaged in battle with a pot plant that had overestimated its capacity for sunlight. She pruned in silence, her expression one of brisk domestic purpose. It was hard to imagine that only weeks ago she had stood in a room where history itself had flinched. "Carter's been promoted," Tommy announced, peering over the paper. "Assistant Undersecretary for Special Operations. That should look nice on his stationery." "Quite," said Tuppence. "He can add it to the list of men who'll never thank us publicly." Tommy folded the paper and reached for the marmalade. "We've joined an exclusive club, my dear. Heroes the government won't admit exist." Tuppence smiled faintly. "I do wish the membership came with better breakfasts." A knock sounded. It was the sort of knock that didn't insist. Quiet, polite, almost secretive. Tommy exchanged a glance with his wife, rose and opened the door. No one stood outside. Only a plain envelope lay on the mat, dampened by the drizzle. No address, no postmark, no seal. He bent down, picked it up and frowned. "Postman's grown subtle." "Perhaps it's from the electric company," Tuppence suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. He brought it to the table, tore it open carefully, and withdrew a single card. The paper was thick, the handwriting neat and impersonal. "For services rendered. With gratitude." Below the words, resting loose inside the envelope, was a small red wax bead, the faint impression of a royal crown stamped at its centre. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tuppence said quietly, "He does have a flair for understatement." Tommy turned the wax between his fingers, the red gleam catching the lamplight. "Our anonymous monarch. At least he's tidy about his thank yous." She rose and crossed to the notice board above the sideboard, their private gallery of memories, newspaper clippings, postcards from old cases, a pressed flower from an adventure in Devon. She took a pin and fastened the wax bead beside a faded photograph of the two of them outside Blunt's detective agency, long ago. "There," she said, "among friends." They resumed breakfast as though the interruption had been no more than a neighbour's parcel. Yet the silence that followed carried a strange weight, half pride, half melancholy. Tommy poured more tea. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would happen if one of those little secrets we tidy up ever came loose?" Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "You mean if the ghost started writing memoirs?" "Precisely." She sipped thoughtfully. "Then England would be in dreadful need of editors." He laughed. "You're remarkably calm about it." "My dear, after Sanborn Park, a scandal or two would be practically refreshing." Tommy leaned back, studying her. "You really do enjoy it, don't you? The danger, the absurdity, the whole cloak and dagger business." Tuppence smiled, but her eyes were soft. "I enjoy the feeling of mattering, I suppose, of being trusted even by those who'd never admit it." "Ah, patriotism in a teacup." She tilted her head. "And you?" "I enjoy your company," he said simply. That earned him the smallest, most genuine smile of the morning. The clock on the mantel chimed 11. Outside, the drizzle thickened, blurring the view of the street. Tommy rustled the newspaper again. "Listen to this. The King to embark on goodwill tour of the Commonwealth. Rather a bold itinerary for a man who may, or may not, be the same one who came home from the war." Tuppence's tone was dry. "One must keep up appearances. The Empire depends on it." He gave a short laugh. "Sometimes I think the Empire depends entirely on good tailoring and bad memory." She placed her cup down gently. "Tommy." "Yes?" "Promise me something. Within reason. When the next mysterious invitation arrives, because it always does, let's pretend, just for a day, that we don't see it." He looked over the paper, one eyebrow raised. "And deprive the Crown of its least convenient detectives." "Exactly." He folded the newspaper with exaggerated care. "My love, we've made that promise before." "I know. And we've broken it every time." She sighed, smiling despite herself. "Then perhaps it's a comfort to be consistent." The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Tommy rose, refilled their cups, and returned to his seat. "Strange thing about that bead," he mused. "A single drop of wax, and yet it's the heaviest thing in the room." Tuppence looked up at it on the board, the way it gleamed like a ruby amid the faded clutter of their lives. Perhaps that's what truth always looks like in the end. Polished, simple, and far too late to change anything. He nodded slowly. "Still, it's rather nice to know someone noticed." "Yes," she said, "even if it's someone who'll never say it aloud." They sat in companionable quiet. The sound of rain softened against the window, The clock ticked in patient rhythm, and the city outside resumed its endless hum. At last, Tommy glanced at her and said, "So, Mrs. Beresford, what do you think of royal weekends?" Tuppence smiled over her teacup. "Dreadfully overrated, Mr. Beresford," he chuckled. "Agreed. Next time let's try a commoner's holiday, somewhere with fewer corpses and better weather." And no telegrams marked confidential. Perish the thought. They clinked cups in mock toast. The camera would linger, if there had been one, on the wall, on that single red wax bead catching the morning light. To a stranger, it might have seemed decorative. To those who knew, it was the quiet pulse of something larger than gratitude, secrecy, loyalty, and the quiet ache of knowing too much. It glimmered once more, like a drop of blood frozen in time before the frame faded to black.